Hey guys, this is a more informational video than an instructional one. But I'm here so you can see exactly what goes on, the difference between scooping and compressing. Okay, so just kind of so you guys can see it. Here's my golf ball. We're going to assume the golf ball on a bare surface, like the fairway, like a freshly cut trim fairway, not sitting up in the rough. Okay, so when we scoop, really there's two variables going on that we want to be aware of. There's the place the club hits the ground, that's called low point. Just think of that as the divot, right? That's where the club's hitting the ground. And there's also the angle of attack which you hit that can be down or up to varying degrees. So when we scoop, what ends up happening is the weight's back. The weight's back. So the low point gets stuck behind the ball. Most people that scoop, they don't shift their weight under their lead foot. Also, I would say the flipping, breaking down with the wrist motion, that makes the club get too long too early. I can show you all that in another video. That can move the low point behind the ball too. But at the end of the day, when you're scooping, your low point's behind the ball. And so what ends up happening is the club will hit the ground first, and then obviously, we wouldn't want to continue to hit down. That would be an extremely heavy shot. So when you scoop, you hit the ground first. This is usually what happens when you hit a solid shot. You like graze it or just like barely hit the ground first, and then we actually kind of hit with an upward angle or an angle of attack that's not as much down as the tour average. All right, so scooping is basically when we almost, if you think about it, you almost have to try to hit the ground first and hit up on it. Because if you think about it, if we don't hit the ground and we scoop, that's a top shot. That's a top shot. The club hits the middle of the ball, and then it keeps going up. That ball's going to go grazing along the ground. It's not going to get up in here. So that's what scooping is by definition. Low points behind, we hit up on it, basically. It is possible to still hit down like 1 or 2 degrees or 3 degrees, but more often than not, people that scoop, they don't hit as much down as a tour player does, right? So anyway, but basically the way to think of it is you're stuck behind it and you have to hit up. Because if you hit down and you're stuck behind it, that's not going to be good. Okay. Compressing the ball. So compressing the ball is when we hit ahead of the ball on a downward angle. So that looks like this. Now I want you to think about two things going on here. So the club's not in the ground yet. Club's not in the ground yet. We're actually hitting it kind of low in the face. Good ball strikers are not actually going to hit the ball in the middle of the club. It's actually going to be a little bit low due to the nature of how they have the shaft when they hit the ball, and the club shouldn't be in the ground yet when it hits the ball. So they hit about right here, and the club's going to continue to move down into the turf, right? So that's really what compressing the ball is. And you can think of this too, the shaft angle is pretty indicative of whether the club's going to move up or whether the club's going to move down. Very seldomly are you going to see this and then the club just starts moving up. That's really hard to do. Or very seldomly you're going to see this and then the club continues to move down. That's really hard to do. Scooping is when the club gets like this. Usually the shaft is backward because the club is past the hands. We hit the ground first and then the club has to move up. Again, the reason you're hitting inconsistent shots is because you're literally relying on hitting the ground first and then trying to hit up through the ball. It's really hard to time that up because there's nothing under the ball. On a tight lie, like fairway, this is gonna be very difficult to do. That's just the way it is. And then when we compress the ball, it's really easy because the club's not hitting the ground yet, and then we just gotta hit down ahead of it. Now this does almost get scary because if you think about it, so like I would say when people go from, just think about the club head, the club shaft and the ball. When people try to go from this to this, usually the first thing that's going to happen, they're either going to top the ball or hit the ground first. And here's why. You'll hit the ground first because maybe you're hitting down, but the low point's not forward. And usually what people do if they run into this is they're just going to go back to scooping because they don't want to hit shots super duper fat. What I'd say to that is, see, when you hit down but you hit the ground first, the problem is not that you made a divot. The problem is where the divot is. Okay, hitting down is not a bad thing. You just got to make sure you're hitting the ball first. How do we make sure we're hitting the ball first? Move the low point in front of the ball, that's weight shift. Okay. Now, you might top the ball if you tend to get your weight forward, but say we're not trying to hit down on it. If the right wrist stays back, the club will hit down. Or trail wrist if you're a lefty. As the right wrist flips, as it flexes, the club will move up. Okay. Very important to understand that. Okay. So, and that could be, you know, if you're, you know, because if you're hitting the ground first, you're probably going to start doing this because this makes the club shorter and keeps you from hitting the ground too much. If you try to compress the ball and you do this as you go through, you're probably going to top the ball because the club didn't go through. So I'd say the scariest thing for people going from scooping the ball to compressing the ball is hitting down. Like the thought of hitting down is literally like what frightens people. And what I'll tell you is don't be afraid of hitting down. It's just you got to hit the ball first. I guess it's kind of dangerous if you think about it, but that is how good players are hitting the ball. They're hitting down. Just the way it is, you know. And I would totally, you know, you got to think about it. You know, when you scoop, you're trying to avoid the ground. Like you're like hitting up on it. You're trying to get the club off the ground as you hit the ball. Like that's what you're trying to do. When you hit down, well, you're hitting the ball. You're trying to hit the ground after the ball, because when you hit down, if you don't hit the ground, you're going to skull the shot. Club has to continue moving down for the club to ride up the grooves and create backspin and launch. So that's probably what trips up a lot of people the most, is just the fear of hitting down. And here's what I'll say. You might chunk some when you're learning to compress the ball at first. You just got to get your weight forward more, like really exaggerate it, right? But don't be afraid of hitting the ground. That's usually what hinders people from learning to compress the ball the most, is the fear of hitting the ground.